Hi, friends. All right. So today I thought it might be fun. I was going to revisit these. I did a quick reel or short, I suppose they call them here on YouTube, of these little berries and fruits. I'm a food kind of addict. I love cooking it. I love picking it. I love growing it. I love eating it. So I thought it would be fun to kind of paint some of these, and they might make some cute little cards as well. So with that, I'm going to paint a few of these today for you. And if you like, you can follow along. I'm using, again, my Dugato, although, let's see. Yeah, I think I'm going to stick with the, you know what, actually, no, I think I'll stick with my Dugato. As you know, I'm really a Princeton user, but I've been using this Dugato brush and I really enjoy it. So I'm going to go ahead and stick with that. It's very firm and it's got the nice short handle and very springy, so I really like that. I'm using a 140 pound, 300 GSM cold press paper. And I'm going to be working mostly, the techniques I'm going to be using are going to be wet on wet and wet on dry. For most of the inside of the berries, I'll use the wet on wet, and for some of the other areas like leaves and such, I'll use both wet on wet and wet on dry. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. I've drawn them out already, and I'm always happy to share any of these drawings with you. If you like, you can just email me till I can figure out how to put them together for you. I have heard of several of you in Canada that would like me to maybe come up with another way to deliver my pre-kit prep work kits. And I am trying to figure out, as you know, if you've been following me here on YouTube, I'm just a tad tech challenged. I hate to say that because I feel like I'm going to make it happen by saying that, but it is true. While I'm talking as well, I'm getting my brush wet. I've got my 2 glasses of water, one to wash and one to rinse. Because watercolors are transparent, you always want to make sure you have that nice clean brush. So anyway, going back to those pre-work kits, I'm trying to figure out how I can create downloads so you could just go on Etsy, pay maybe a couple dollars and just download them and print them out. And that might work well for those of you that live in Canada and shipping expenses so high. I'm trying to figure out a way to get those to you. Okay, the colors I'll be using will be my Winsor Newton. I'm back with my Winsor Newtons today, and I'm going to be using Cad Red. I actually really like the Mylene colors. I liked some of these reds they had. They had a lot of really pretty reds, so I do like those. But I will be using my Cad Red. For the blueberries, I'll be using my turquoise Winsor Newtons and my violets and maybe some Cad Yellow and Cad Orange for that peach. So I think that'll be kind of fun. What I like to do is I like to somewhat get my colors set up in my palette here so that they're ready to go, because if you are working wet and wet, you don't want your paint to dry, and then when you go back into it, trying to achieve that wet and wet, nice blending color, it turns into blooms instead, which happens when you're bringing wet paint onto drier paint. Okay, so I do try and mix a lot of my colors. Let me get a little bit of that Cad Red for those beautiful cherries, and I think I'm going to add a little of my Quin Magenta in there just to give it that little deep color. And as you know, Quin Magenta is my favorite. Okay, I think that's good. Let's start with, I'm going to, as I said, most of this will be wet and wet. And have your paper towel dry because you don't ever want your brush to be dripping wet. You just want it to be wet, but not puddling or pooling on your paper. What I'm going to do first is just wet these blueberries. So I'm getting my brush wet, but not dripping. And I'm going to go into this first little blueberry here. And I've actually got all of this fruit sitting in my fridge. So that was fun. And you know, I think I might use the Prussian blue, but very watered down. So a very light value, meaning it has more water than pigment. And I don't want too much of that on my brush. So I might just tap in here and then tap in to that blueberry. Just like that. And let it kind of spread. There we go. Now, I think what I'll do with this one in the back is we'll start over again. And I'll just get it wet. Now, making sure that you don't run up against this wet paint or it'll all just flow together. So I'm leaving a very small white space in between each berry, so it doesn't just all puddle together. And then I might use, oopsie. This palette, by the way, all of you always ask me about it, and I'll link it in my description. It's made by Miss Ceramics. I don't know if she's still doing them, but I'm happy to share her Etsy site. And I think I'll just mix that with a little bit of that Prussian blue. Tap off so I'm not flooding my paper with a ton of water. And I don't want to fill this in completely because I'm going to go in with some other colors. Then wash my brush, rinse my brush. So we're going in with a nice, fresh, clean brush. And repeating that, now see, I accidentally touched this berry, which is still wet. So the paint from this one is coming into here, which is, I mean, it's not a huge deal because they're all the same color. But I try to avoid that. Okay, and I'm going to go in, pick up a little bit of that blue paint, and just tap in like that. And then I'm going to go in and use a little bit of the Winsor Newton. And this is actually manganese blue. It's a really, really pretty blue. I like it. It's a little newer color for me. So I'm just going to put a little bit of that on my palette. Yeah, that's pretty. Many times when I'm mixing my colors, I don't mix them all the way because I like them to mix a little bit on my palette and on my paper. I think that looks really cool. So I'm going in with that wet brush, but not too wet. So if you think it might be too wet, you just dab it off. And I'm going to touch in. Now I'm getting the exact effect I wanted. I didn't want all my berries to be the exact same color. So I tried to vary them a little bit. So as you see here, I've got some blues, some purples, and then they're even blending and creating some other really pretty colors. If you wanted to, 1 second, I'm going to grab a tissue. And I talk a lot about leaving this white space because it's really interesting in your paintings. If you're a little unsure how to leave that white space, You can use a little tissue that you wad up and just kind of blot and let the tissue create some lights and some darks for you. And that way, until you get used to where you want white spaces, which creates so much, like I said, interest in your paintings, you can do it that way. And then I'm going to go in, I'm going to use my olive and my sap green. I'm just barely scraping off here. So I get rid of that excess water, and then I'm going to go in and create some of these leaves. So using very, very light pressure, and I'm holding my fingers kind of close, so I have a little bit of control there, and just using the tip. So holding my brush upright, up and down, and just tapping in barely with that tip, and then pressing and pulling and just making that fun little leaf there. Press, pull, again, creating that leaf. Maybe one here, point, press, there you go. And point, press, there you go. Now, if it runs into your blueberry, that is perfectly okay. I even like that. Just washing my brush. And I think I feel like I want a really deep dark blue. So I'm going to go into that Prussian blue and maybe let's add in a little bit of our green. I think that, ooh, yeah, look at that. That's really pretty. I like mixing and mingle if I'm using a blue fruit to mix it in with my greens. I feel it brings a real coherency. And then I'm just gonna tap in some of these little areas where there might be some shadows. So see how pretty that is? Like that. And there you go. Just rinsing my brush. And then I'm just gonna let that set and do its thing. What I will do is, after I rinse my brush, just dabbing it off so it's damp, and I'm going to run my brush along the bottom of this painting. Just like that. It's kind of fun to create that. There you go. So there are our blueberries. And you could really get creative and add in here maybe some, I don't know, some darker colors if you wanted, maybe some purples. We could go in here and let's mix maybe a little bit of that Prussian blue, Winsor Newton, and add in some of our Payne's gray, which is like a black. But I like it because it's not as harsh as black. It has a little bit of blue in it. And then scraping off so my brush isn't fully dripping. And let's tap into the center, because I looked at the blueberries in my fridge and I noticed right in the center, they've got a little bit more darkness. So I'm just tapping in. Again, if it runs together, I'm okay with that. There you go. Okay. So there's our blueberries. Let's go into our strawberries. Again, I'm going in, I washed and rinsed my brush, and I'm just going to lay down some water here. I'm going around the edge because my intention with this strawberry was to have it a cut open strawberry and this one on its side. So I tried to leave that white part of the strawberry open. And then I'm going to go in, pick up some of that red, and just start dabbing in. And let it spread where I put that water. Just like that. I think that looks nice. I have to say I really liked the reds in that Mylang set. So they had, I think, 5 different reds, which is so great for the beginner because sometimes you just don't know how to create those different colors. And then I'm going to dry my brush off a little bit and maybe just pick up some of that paint and go in and make a little deeper red for the side of the strawberry. So I'll mix some of that red, and maybe if I mix in some green, it'll just darken the red. And go along here like that. Okay, and then let's do our other strawberry, remembering to keep some white space in between this strawberry and that one, because otherwise, which boy, today I'm not doing a good job of that, am I? C'est la vie. That way it doesn't turn into one big giant blob. I'm going to take my red now, just tap in, let it spread. Now, if you're getting a lot of puddling and pooling, not pulling, just swipe your brush off a bit and go in and pick that up. I'm going to remove with a dry brush so it has a light spot on top, and then go back in, pick up some of my red, and let it kind of blend. There you go. But yet leaving that white spot in the middle. Just softening the edge there. There you go. So I kind of quite like that. And I think what I'll do is use a darker value of that red, meaning more paint versus water, and touch in on this lower edge here. So that gives it some depth there. There we go. Yeah, I like that. Now I would like to see this blend a little bit more. So I have a damp brush. I'm going to go in, push, pull, encourage it to spread around a bit. There we go. Yeah, I quite like that. Next, we'll just do these, or I will just do these little green, fun little leaves on top of here. So picking up again my olive and my sap green mixed together, getting rid of some of that water. And then we'll go in and do some of these fun little leaves that are part of a strawberry. Need a little bit more green. I sprayed my palette here with water and it kind of puddled, so I got a little bit too much water. And I'm perfectly okay with the green leaves kind of running into the red. I don't have a problem with that at all. So now this one, it's not going to do that because it wasn't wet. So there you go. Might go in, just add a little darker green here and there. Something like that, just to give it some depth. Okay, and then ending with washing my brush, but leaving some water on there and just doing the same as we did here. So you've got this fun little shadowy effect. And I guess once this dries, what I'll do is I'll go back in and put those little seeds, which are always kind of fun. And just to give it a little bit of texture. There we go. Okay, let's move on to our peach. Again, cleaning my brush off, rinsing my brush. And we're just going to lay down a nice wash of water. This has a little bit of green in it, but that's okay. So you don't want any puddling or pooling. You just want this really nice shine. That's the perfect amount of water. So we've got that, and then I'm going to go in with my, I think I'll use Cad Yellow there as kind of the first glaze. And let's just kind of lay that down. I'm not completely coloring it in. I want these nice white spots. And then I'll go in with some of this red, kind of this pinky red. And if you think you have too much water, just dab it off and just start touching in. Let it kind of blend. There we go. If that's too dark for you, just rinse your brush and pick some of it up, just like that. I think I will go in with some of my Cad Orange. These peaches I had were really beautiful. The colors they had in them, I was like, wow, that looks delish. Okay. So just finishing coloring that in, letting it be wet in there. There you go. And maybe touching in just a tiny bit with a little bit more Cad Red. Be very careful with Cad Red because it's just so vibrant. I'm going to add a little bit of pink to it just because I love pink Quin Magenta. It's like I can't get away from it, right? So I added my Quin Magenta to that Cad Red, and I think that'll be a really pretty color. Oh yeah, I like that. Just dabbing it in here and there, kind of letting the water do its thing, and ending with washing, rinsing your brush, and again going in and just using the tip of your brush to pull some of that out, just to give it a little bit of a light, fun shadow. Okay, we will also do our little stem here. So I'm washing and rinsing my brush and picking up some burnt sienna and some brown. Oops, didn't mean to do that. That's interesting, huh? I guess a peach could have a little bit of a shadow down there. And just using the point of my brush, so very light pressure. Point, press a little bit, and lift up. There you go. Okay, now while that's wet, because I love my wet and wet, I'm going in to pick up some of that sap green and olive green, having that real nice tea consistency, getting rid of a little bit of that, and go in and let's just create our leaf here. So point, press, and release. Point, press, release. Just something like that. We could do another leaf here if you wanted. We'll wait till this dries and then go in and just have another little leaf. Meanwhile, I'm going to go in with that same brown color and just put some little, barely using the tip of my brush to go in and just add some of those little seeds you see on strawberries, just like that. Okay, And look at this. This is kind of nice. I like the little shadow. It was actually an accident, but I went with it. And I think watercolors is such a great practice in that, because you really have to be able to kind of let go, especially in wet and wet. So let's do these fun little cherries. Now, the cherries, I am definitely going to use my Cad Red. Ooh, look at that. Anything with the word Cad in front of it is going to be very opaque, very dense, very almost not like a gouache because it's not as thick, but definitely that opaqueness. And then I'm just going to add in a tiny bit of my Cad Magenta because, you know, it's my favorite color. And I almost have to blend it in somehow. I got to squeeze it into every painting, don't I? Now this one I'm going to do, I'm not going to get these wet first. So this is a little bit different. So I'm going to point, press, and just leaving white space, okay? So point, press, leaving just some white space up at the top. So there we go, and in between them, because I don't want them to completely blend into just one big puddle. Washing and rinsing my brush. I'm gonna go in while this is still a little bit wet and create that stem, which I'm using, actually, I'm going to use this raw umber. Let me push this over a bit so you can see my paints. So I'm going to use the raw umber and maybe a little burnt sienna. And I might even add a tiny bit of that red and create a stem from that. So using the tip of my brush, very light pressure. There we go. There we go. And we'll put a couple little leaves on there. Let's see, let's use our olive green and sap green again. And just barely getting rid of some of that paint. And we're going to, let's see, point, press, so widening out those bristles and then pulling it up to get that nice point. Just like that. Okay, just dipping into a little bit more water and point, press, like that. Point, press. There you go. And if you don't like the little blob, just tap off your brush and move it around. No big deal. Like that. So there's your little cherries. Now once this dries, I'm going to go in and just add a tiny bit of darkness down near the bottom. We could even, let's try this. Go ahead and rinse your brush. And let's pick up a little bit of that Cad yellow that we had on our palette. And just play and add in a tiny bit, maybe of that. I think that could be real interesting in these cherries. Yeah, I like that. And I love when I can get some really different type of colors and they kind of blend on my page. That is really one of my favorite things. I'm going to use a tiny bit also of that Cad yellow and maybe just mix a little bit of the green and just touch in here like that. We could even try a little bit of the dark green. And touch in, see what that does. Just play, see what you kind of like. Okay, Let's even go in and add some of that dark green to the very bottom. There you go. So mix with all your colors. And always, for me, I like to mix my leaf colors with whatever color the fruit or the flower is. I just think it brings this real pretty coherency. Now I'm going to use a very watered down version of this green. So a very light value, meaning it has more water than paint. And let's just create another little leaf here. Just like that, just for some interest. There you go. Okay, let's go on to our watermelon here, which is always a fun one to paint. I'm going to pick up some more of kind of that cherryish color, but I'm going to create a lighter value because you always want to start with lighter. Cherries are mine here in my fridge are very, very vibrant and deep and rich. And then I'm just going to go in and start painting. Ooh, rinsing my brush because I like soft lines. I get rid of a lot of those hard lines. I like it to look washy. To me, that is so much more interesting. There you go. Something like that. You can always pick up a little bit here and there. And then let's let that dry and go ahead and do this side. There we go. So I'm just picking up that paint, and this is wet on dry for the side. There we go. Now, when I'm going to right now do this green at the bottom, and I think I'm going to make this a little thicker now that I'm looking at it. I like how thin that is. I want a big piece of pineapple, right? Okay, there we go. You can always lift with kind of a dry brush if you don't like something. You can always lift up some paint. I'm going to go in and be very careful creating this rind at the bottom. Just using light pressure, point, press, and bringing it up on the side. You want to make sure that you're leaving that white line in there, okay? That just tends to be how everybody paints these, and I kind of like it. While that is drying a little, I'm going to pick up some of my olive green, and I think I'm going to paint a little bit more of this peach. Point, press. There we go. Yeah, I think I kind of like that better. Yeah, that's good. I don't want to get too much touching in here and overworking. So let's go on to our pear. Right here. So the pears I have, they're so beautiful. But you know, I'm obviously obsessed with food here. And then we'll come back into this like we did the strawberries and go wait for this to dry. Otherwise, if we go wet right now into this and it's damp, it will just turn into a big bloom. So we want to give this a minute to dry, and then we'll go in and dab in some little seeds there. So let's apply a wash, a very light wash to our pear, and I'm going to use, I think I'm going to use a little bit more of a lemon yellow versus that cad yellow. Woo! So that's this right here. You know, I've never really been a fan of lemon yellow, but I've been trying to use it a little bit more lately. I'm going to add in a little bit of cad yellow just to tone it or warm it up a tiny bit. So I'm just adding in a tiny bit of that cad yellow just to bring a tiny bit of warmth to it. And let's go wet into dry, wetting my brush, softening all those lines, and I'm leaving white space in there, okay? I don't want it to be fully just painted all the same color. I want some interest. There we go. And then I'm going to go wet into wet, and I'm going to use a little bit of my, let's see, let's use our green and maybe a little bit of brown and a tiny bit of red. Kind of like that red in my plums. I'm sorry, my pears. So let's do that. I'm using quite a pushing down on my brush to widen out those bristles. Like that. Because this is wet and wet, it's spreading quite nicely. If you don't see it spreading like you'd really like to, you just go in with a little wet brush, dab it off, and just go right along these hard lines and soften them up. There you go. And then on the side over here, I think I'll stick with that lemon yellow and maybe go in with a tiny bit of that green we mixed, which was the olive and the sap green. There you go. Because my pears, they actually had quite a bit of color in them. I was somewhat surprised. So I'm going to let that sit and spread. It's actually spreading quite a bit. Now, the one thing I didn't do here is what we did on all these. And I didn't really go in and pull out that color on the bottom. Not a big deal. That's just kind of an added touch. It just kind of gives it a nice effect. And then let's do it on our pear here. I don't know why I keep wanting to call it plum. It's very light. It's nothing heavy. So there you go. I quite like this pear. If you can see it up close, it's nice. Now this is dry, and I can tell it's dry because it's not cool to the touch. It's just neutral. So I'm going to go in and pick up some of my Prussian blue. I'm sorry, not Prussian blue. I could use Prussian blue, but this is my Payne's Gray. And this is, tip of the brush is a natural seed. So we're just going to, I think the seeds actually go downward. So you could put in however many you wanted. And there you go. Okay. Let's finish off with our stem. Oop. Point, press. Maybe put a little bit more paint on there, which I used my burnt sienna, my raw umber, and then if you add in some of this green, it gives you a nice dark color, which I like. There we go. And just create that stem. There. You could do a little, kind of that little divot. Now, the last time I made pears, what I also kind of ended it with was I took some of that same brown and let's get that a tiny bit wet. And then I did a little bit of splattering on the bottom of the pear. So maybe cover, it's not a big deal, but cover the bottom and just tap your brush. Now that means if it's not really coming off, just add a little bit more water. Sometimes this can be a little tricky. There we go. Because I'm trying not to get it all over. So there you go. I think it's just kind of fun. And we've got our light over here. So this side of the pear is a little bit lighter. And I think that's good. I think that's really pretty. So there you go. There's your fruit in 40 minutes. If you have any questions, I will make this a little kit I will put on Etsy, where you get the original, you'll get my swatches, you will get, you know, anything else I kind of did in preparing for this. And I think that's it. If you have any questions, just let me know. And thank you so much for being here. I enjoy all of you so much, and have fun with this. This would make really, really cute and fun cards for spring and summer. Okay, happy painting, everybody. Bye-bye.